I know.
You know, I'm showing up.
Gonna run out of time. Can I have your attention? Can you hear it okay? We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and get started with our program. I'm going to first call on Rosita Worrell to come forth and make some opening comments. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. And welcome to the celebration, our 40th celebration. Can we believe that it's early leaders of Sealaska, which had its beginning first in the Alaska Native Brotherhood and the Alaska Native Sisterhood, and then in the Central Council of Tlingit and Haida Indians. Truly, we have a wonderful heritage in having that heritage beginning first with our own traditional leaders, and then moving into the Alaska Native Brotherhood and Sisterhood, and then into the Central Council of Tlingit and Haida Indians. And from those roots, Sealaska Corporation began. And we are truly honored to have many of those early leaders who were instrumental in the formation of Sealaska Corporation. We also have with us a very special guest, someone who was at the Alaska Federation of Natives and who was instrumental in casting the vote that allowed for the entry of Sealaska Corporation to participate, or actually at the time it was Tlingit and Haida, to participate in the Alaska Federation of Natives. So we owe truly a debt and want to honor Emil Noddy, who cast that deciding vote and that tie vote at the AFN board. So we are very fortunate to have the leaders here today. But we also want to recognize that it took so many of our own people who were busy raising funds, having bake sales, raising 25 cents, 50 cents, $1 to send our early leaders to Congress to fight for our Alaska Native land claims. So I'm looking forward to a wonderful session here with these early directors and hoping to learn a lot about our history. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosita. My name is Ed Thomas, President of Tlingit Haida Central Council. My Tlingit name is Zahu. Let me now introduce what we are calling the inaugural board members of Sealaska. You might not be aware, but when Sealaska started, they didn't have the full 18 members appointed or elected at the same time, and so hopefully we'll get into that a little later. But let me just now introduce who is here today. First, we have John Borbich Jr. sitting here. Give John a hand. Next, we have Cyril George Sr. down there at the end. Next we have Aaron Isaacs down here. And next we have Clarence Jackson Sr. And finally, Marlene Johnson over here. I want to pause and recognize Marge Gamble, who's sitting in the middle over there. I'm doing this so she can get mad at me. She was one of the delegates to the special Tlingit and Haida convention that they had in 1968 when they accepted the settlement, and I wanted to recognize Marge because she's been pushing very hard to have us recognize our initial board for the work that they did, and I'm glad we were able to pull that off here today. I see a few of my executive council members here, so I'll introduce them, not in any particular order. Rob Sanderson Jr., Will Micklin, I saw him somewhere around here. Harold Houston, he's way back there in the corner. Yodine Armour, she's somewhere tending to a child, I believe. But anyway, she's here. Anyway, with that, I'm going to go ahead and call on Cyril George to do the opening prayer, and then we'll get on with our lunch.
Will all rise, please? Our Father in heaven, we thank you and praise you for this time together, a time of remembering some of our people that worked for us and have passed on. Father in heaven, we're thankful for leadership. We're thankful for our organizations, starting with ANB, Tlingit and Hyde, Sealaska. Father in heaven, be with our families back home. Be with the leaders. Be with our young ones. Be with our grandparents. Father in heaven, bless our efforts. Be with us in all that we do throughout this day. This to ask in thy name. Amen.
Okay, what I'd like to ask is those that are standing over there and a few more could volunteer and go through the line and serve our front table guests, please. And as soon as they are done, we'll go ahead and can I have your attention, please? We're going to begin our program momentarily, and this is a celebration of the Sealaska's inaugural board. But I needed to point out that during this era, these same leaders gave life to contracting for BIA services in Alaska. In 1971, when John Borovich was still president, they entered into the very first Bi-Indian contract in Alaska, and they contracted for Southeast Agency. And if you can imagine how much effort that took for our leadership at that time to implement a new contract at the same time advocating on our behalf for the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. There's a lot of work that needs to be done even in just contracting. And so I wanted to start that off with this comment because we do have a lot of Tlingit Haida either officials, delegates, or staff members here, and it's important to understand that during this era was a very important part of our history that you need to be aware of. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Kukesh to carry out the program.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear back all right? Somebody had, okay, good, thank you. Thank you. I want to introduce members of the Sealaska, current Sealaska board that are here today. I'll start with Bill Thomas and ask him to rise from Cluckwan, Haines. Bill? Barbara Nelson is here. Barbara, would you stand to be recognized? Barbara's back there. Thank you. From Juneau. From Yakutat, we have Joe Nelson, who's here. Joe, would you stand to be recognized? Joe? Originally from Cluckwan Haines with some ties to Petersburg, Rosita Worrell. Would you please stand to be recognized, Rosita? From Kate Clarence Jackson. Edward Thomas, of course, from Craig originally, lives here in Juneau now. And Jody Mitchell is here in the audience someplace. Where are you, Jody? Jody, thank you very much. I also want to recognize some other people who are in the audience with us today. We really appreciate you being here. Randy Rororo from the Governor's Office, would you please stand to be recognized? And John Moeller from the Governor's Office. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you. Len Gelbrecht from the Juneau School District. Would you please stand to be recognized? Thank you for being here. Yeah. Former President of Sealaska Corporation, would you just recognize, please, Robert Loescher? Bob, good to see you. I think he's in the audience. Rold, are you in the audience? Rold Helgeson, would you please stand to be recognized? Many of you probably know that he's leaving Southeast Alaska and going north. We really appreciate and take an opportunity here to thank you for your contribution to the Native people of Southeast Alaska, and we're hoping that you're going to continue to work for us in that different capacity. I'd like, with that statement, to have the search board, who is here today, to stand to be recognized. The search board. I guess now it's a search board job to find a replacement for Rold. So congratulations on your endeavors, Rold, and good luck to the Board of Directors of Search on their endeavors to find a new head person for that organization. What we'd like to do right now is, what we wanted to do is to have individuals who are here today, and I think you introduced them already. Did you introduce everybody? You introduced the members of the board, original board here. Not all of them could make it today. We really tried to get everybody here, the ones who were still living from the original board. But we do have 5 members of the board here, and of course we have somebody who's a special guest to us. What we're going to do is we're going to start off with that special guest. Many of you may not know the history of Sealaska's involvement in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. We were originally left out. We were originally told, you already got your settlement. Remember, we got the settlement with Tlingit and Haida through the Court of Claims. Is that what it was called? It was a judgment fund. $7 million. I remember thinking about that $7 million. I was really young when they got that settlement. Really, really young, Marlene. $7 million. Boy, I was impressed. $7 million. I couldn't imagine what $7 million was and how it looked and how it felt to have that kind of money in the bank. And then Elizabeth Taylor divorced Richard Burton that year, and she got $7.5 million. God, felt bad. What I'd like to do, though, we were left out. It went to the AFN board for the AFN board to decide whether or not Sealaska or Southeast Alaska, not Sealaska, but Southeast Alaska, would be included in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. The Board of Directors voted. It was a tie vote. The person who cast the deciding vote to allow Southeast Alaska to participate in the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act was the then chairman of the board, or the president of the board, Emil Noddy. And he cast the vote. I always felt that he did it because he didn't want to fight the Sealaska politicians who would probably have been there saying, no, we don't want a Native Claim Settlement Act because we were left out. That would have been a tough battle for him. But I think he needed the Southeast politicians on his side to be able to get this work done. But for whatever the reason was, history will always show, because of Emil Noddy, Southeast Alaska was included in the last Native Claim Settlement Act. So without further ado, I'll ask Mr. Noddy to come forward to address those of you who are in the audience today, and thank him very much on behalf of the Southeast Alaska people of Sealaska Corporation, and ask you to come forward if you would. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'm glad to be here. When I come to Southeast Alaska, I have a lot of friends down here, I'm fortunate to say. I went to Mount Edgecombe and graduated in 1951. But prior to that, I fished when I was 15 years old in Klawock. And 16, I fished in Craig, and I was 17, 18, I fished in Heidelberg. So I know quite a few of the older people down there. And on Mount Edgecombe, I got to meet a number of guys over there, that really outstanding people. I remember Herbie Diedrichson and Roger Lang and Moses Johnson and the young ANB team down there. And one of the memorable games they played over there was they played against the House of David. And the House of David was similar to the Harlem Globetrotters. And House of David being a bunch of tall guys with big beards, and they were going to show these locals something, and they only beat ANB team by about 2 points. And they quit horsing around. They had to get serious in order to win the game. But I want to just say something here. It's, forgive me if I mispronounce it. Gunach Duja. Yohat Dua Sa. My Tlingit name is Gunach Duja. Yale Ayas Hat. I am a raven. Luke Naadi. Nahat Seti. I am a member of the Koho clan. So I think many of you know the history of the land claims. Just for some of the younger ones, I'll just say, make a short statement about how it happened. I got a hold of a letter. Well, first of all, the area director for Bureau of Indian Affairs here in Anchorage, here in Juneau, got appointed to be the Commissioner of Indian Affairs in Washington, D.C. And he went down, he had to be examined by the committee of Senate Interior Committee for his fitness. And during the questioning period, Scoop Jackson, who was senator from Washington State, said to Bob Bennett, "You are an Indian yourself. You're an Oneida Indian. What can you do different to solve the Indian problem in America?" The Indian problem was they were spending about $200 million a year for the past 100 years on Indians, and they always ended up, any way you cut the data, Indian people were on the bottom. Short lifespan, high unemployment, undereducation, no bad housing, and high unemployed, and high infant mortality. Bob Bennett started to answer, and Scoop Jackson said, "No, don't shoot from the hip. I want the written report in 90 days. So 90 days, which was April 1966, he put out a report, and I got a hold of that report. He devoted one page to Alaska, and it said the Bureau of Indian Affairs was drawing up a final solution to the land problem in Alaska. And being an engineer, not knowing what this was all about, I read it and sat on it and wondered about it until July. I decided if we had any rights in land, we should participate. So I wrote a letter to 14 people around the state. Some of them I knew, some of them I did not know. Howard Rock at the Tundra Times got the letter and headlined it and said, statewide meeting called for. And from July till October, when we called the meeting, there was a story every week. And we had 300 people show up for the meeting. And that's where we formed Alaska Federation of Natives. The rest is history. I might just say a little bit about, maybe I'll tell you about some things that happened along the way. But I got involved in a lot of different things that, to do land claims, we had to deal with a lot of things. But one of the memorable things was I got a call one afternoon and said, Emily, you have to go to Bethel. I said, why? He said, well, they have a fish problem out there. So I got on a plane and going to Bethel, and about halfway there, a state trooper came over, and he was in uniform, and sat beside me and said, what are you going to Bethel for? And I said, well, I don't know. I just got a call I should go. So I said to the trooper, I said, what are you going to Bethel for? He said, I don't know, but the governor's office called me to go over there. So we landed there. There was State Senator Chuck Cicero was on the radio explaining things, and Deputy Commissioner from Health was over there. It turned out the local fishermen were being told not to sell their fish to the Japanese. So I got on a little float plane and we flew up and down the villages, and we'd land, go up the riverbank and fight the mosquitoes, and 2 or 3 families would gather around and we'd talk through an interpreter. Now that wasn't too long ago, but I had to talk through an interpreter because most of the people in the gathering didn't understand English. And I was telling them that if the Japanese want to buy your fish, sell it. If they offer you more money, sell it. That it's not illegal. And because when I landed in Bethel, I went down to the riverbank and they were throwing a fish off. And the Seattle buyers were there, and every fish you went by, they'd say small, medium, small, medium. And I saw some pretty big kings go by there. There were never any large kings. So I went back to Anchorage and got on a 10 o'clock flight coming to Juneau. And we were coming down to talk to Governor Hickel. And we were fighting the state, and we were going to ask Hickel to support our position, quit fighting us, and support our position for 40 million acres of land. It'd be a lot easier in Congress if he did support us. So I get down here, and 7 o'clock the next morning, we're sitting in the governor's office, and he came in, and he was pounding the table, bam, cussing and pounding, and you guys are all Democrats, and why don't you help me out? He was having trouble with the Wickersham. You remember the Wickersham? It was a Norwegian boat, and he was using it as a ferry system, and he couldn't go between Seattle and here. He had to do it out of Vancouver. And he was saying, damn it, with one phone call you could solve our problem. We just talk to Bob Bartlett. And he went on like that. And we hadn't even started on 40 million acres yet, so he pointed at me and he said, what the hell were you doing taking the governor's off on in Bethel? So I sat up straight and said, well, Governor, maybe we got to talk about that. He said, those fish buyers out there are buying illegally. They're buying in the round. And state law says you have to buy by the pound. And he stopped me and he said, you're right. But I had those buyers in here and squared their heads. They're buying by the pound. And he stopped and he said, go boys, what are we here for? So that's how we got to talk about 40 million acres. Many of you know Charlie Edwardson. These are just little side stories on what happened. Maybe, I hope there's some interest. He went to he walked in on a party in Washington, D.C. of a bunch of people from AFN on land claims, and he's pretty volatile. And he was half stoned, and they were finished eating, and he grabbed there are 10 people at the table, and he grabbed the tablecloth and jerked it, cussing, and he walked away and threw it over the tablecloth over his head and walked out. Only one water glass fell off the table. So next night, he was feeling kind of bad. He went back to the restaurant and said, I'll pay for any damage I did last night. And the guy said, forget it. That's the best thing that ever happened around here in a long time. I was on my way to, we'd testified 3.5, 4 years, and I was on my way to Seattle to talk to Northwest Federated Tribes. They were all around Scoop Jackson's territory, and I wanted Scoop Jackson to know I was in his backyard. So I say, what am I going to say down here that get his attention? I can't tell this group, there were about 600 to 800 Indian people there, and didn't want to tell them, well, we've been doing testimony and traveling back and forth to D.C. and all that. So I wrote a speech that said, I'll shorten it up, but I said, the United States has spent billions of dollars establishing Israel, and that was done for people who were scattered all over the world who didn't have a home country. If the United States could do that for Israel, they should be willing to draw a line from Anchorage to Fairbanks and from Fairbanks to the Canadian border. Everything north and west of that would be an Indian nation, not a state, but an Indian nation, open to any indigenous person in North America. And that's where all the wealth is anyway, except for down here in the timber and fish. But I got an editorial out of the Anchorage Times. It's surely Mr. Naughty is jesting. And C.R. Lewis is a senator from Anchorage, and he got up on the floor here in the Senate and called me a communist. So it was kind of fun. We were able to get the land freeze because while we were testifying, it took 4.5 years. While we were testifying, people were getting homesteads and trade manufacturing sites, and the state was going along selecting their 103 million acres. So I was in Stanley McCutcheon's office. He was our main attorney in Alaska. And he got on the phone with Stuart Udall, the Secretary of Interior, and convinced him he should stop all land transactions. He was a guardian of the native rights, and it was up to him to keep that land from disappearing. So Udall put on the land freeze. Governor Hickel got a call to go to D.C., and he was going to be named the Secretary of Interior. So coming back to Alaska, he switched planes in Seattle, and a reporter said to him, what are you going to do about the land freeze? Hickel said, what Udall can do with a stroke of a pen, I can undo. So we got concerned. He still had to be confirmed by the Senate. So John Borbridge, Willie Hensley, Eben Hobson, and myself flew to D.C., and the hearings were 3 days. We'd sit in the audience, and they'd ask him a lot of questions about Alaska. And we'd go into a senator's office, and they want to talk to us about Hickel's business, how much land he owned, how come he named the not the Hickel Highway, he named the North Slope Highway. He owned an interest in the gas line coming from Kenai, and we kept saying we don't know anything about his business, but we want to talk about the land freeze. Man, they'd take us from the outer office and put us right in the back room and talk. So we went to the hearings, and when they would ask him a question, he didn't quite give the right answer. So we'd write a note and run around in the hallway, knock on the door, and the staffer would come out, and we'd give him the answer to the question, and go back and sit down, and he'd whisper in the senator's ear, and the senator would re-ask the question, but he had an answer to it. So that went on for 3 days. And our whole purpose was to hold the land freeze. And the third day, the hearings opened up. And Scoop Jackson didn't even sit down. He was standing up and he said, "Governor, we've been dealing with an issue for the last 2 days, and I thought we were done with it. But after reading the record last night, I'm not too sure." He said, "I want a straight answer from you. Will you hold the land freeze?" And I thought, this is up or down. That answer is going to be his confirmation or not. So he said, "Will you come to this committee before you dispose of any public lands in Alaska?" And Hakel said, "I will." He gave up the power of the secretary to the committee for his confirmation. And that was a big victory for us. And Scoop said, I want to hold the corpus intact, so to speak. So when we get around to making a settlement, there's something to settle with. So that was a big victory for us. I think there are a lot more interesting stories, but I'll tell a couple more. John Borbridge and I went to Philadelphia, and we were on a late-night show, radio show. Laura Burke was on the Johnny Carson show. We got an endorsement from the AFL-CIO labor unions. And I went to Cobalt Hall in Detroit, in the biggest group I ever talked to. There were 10,000 preachers in Cobalt Hall. And I asked them for an endorsement on land claims. And some guy way in back of the audience said, "Before we endorse anything, we ought to know what's in it." And this table was twice as long as here, and these guys were all bishops. And one of them got the mic and said, "What do we care what the elements of that bill is? If that's what the Native people want, we should endorse it." Unanimous vote. So we got the endorsement of the National Council of Churches. One thing on this, a little bit on this tie vote thing. The argument against Tlingit and Haida was they already had a settlement. If we bring them in, it'll detract from what we get, it'll weaken us. And my argument was they got a bad deal. And if we're going to stick together as Native people, they have to be part of it. They won't weaken us, they'll strengthen us. So, and we had to throw the attorneys out of the room. They were getting too mixed up in the arguments. One side up against it, one next all for it, and this went on for about an hour. Finally, he hit the gavel and said, "We're going to clear the room. When we come back together, we'll do it as Indians without lawyers." So we put it to a vote, and it came up 12-12. And I cast a tie-breaking vote, which I was glad I did it. It was the right thing to do, I think. And it took you from a $7 billion corporation to a $175 million corporation that included land, which you didn't have before. So that was the right thing to do, I think. When we started AFN, every year that I chaired those meetings for the first 4.5 years, I had John Hope as my parliamentarian, and whenever I get in trouble, he'd get me out, so he was great. One other story that I don't tell very often, and that'll be the end of it. And I tell it just because we took everybody involved in it was doing it without pay. Basically volunteered work. It was an issue that had to be taken care of. I did it for 4.5 years for $1,000 a month because it had to be done. But a couple of guys came up to me and elbowed me and say, "Emil, watch out, there's a contract out on you." So after about 2 months of hearing that, I picked up the phone one day. I was in Anchorage, and I called Av Gross, you know him down here. He was the Attorney General. And I said, Av, what do you know about a contract out on me? He said, I don't know anything, but stay right where you are and I'll call you back. About 15 minutes later, I think the name was Chuck Burton, he was head of the state troopers, called back and he said, Emil, what you've been hearing is true. What you don't know is that we're outside of your house all night. We go to school with your kids. We go to lunch with you. And we are watching out for what it is. He said, we know who the people are. There's 8 people in a pump station, and we have all the names. So they took out a person that was out on bail or probation and said, if anything happens, we've got all of you. So that kind of killed that movement. But that's just one example of the pressures that we had, and I don't think things are getting better in Alaska. We have to keep this movement going of sticking together and working statewide. And through all of this, I always depended on John Borbridge here. He is very articulate, well-informed, and made the best arguments before Congress. And so, thank you.
We have a small gift of appreciation from Southeast Alaska and Sealaska Corporation, and I'll have Rosita present it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the people of Southeast Alaska, the Tlinkits, the Haidas, and the Tsimshians, we want to assure you that your name, Emil Nadi, will always be known among our people. You have our gratitude and respect for the honorable things you did in voting to allow the Tlingit, Haida, and the Tsimshian people to be part of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. Gunalchish. And it's a coho.
We thought since there was only 5 original members who were here from the original board, that we'd allow each of them to say a few words. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll start with Aaron Isaacs, just to give us a little bit of a reflection on what it was like when the Sealaska board first started. Aaron, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Al. It certainly is a pleasure to be here. I think back on when Leonard Cato and I went to the convention 1972 in Petersburg, which was where we were elected. And shortly after, we had a meeting at the old ANB hall when John Fetters, I don't know if any of you remember him, he stands 6'10", but he gave us a class on fiduciary responsibility. By the time he finished, Leonard and I just about resigned. I'm not exaggerating, I'm not kidding. We came so close to just saying we're quitting, we're going back home. Because one week Leonard Cato was a port engineer at the Tlaok Cannery, and I was a carpenter foreman at the Tlaok Cannery. And the next week we were on a board of directors. So you can guess the trauma that Leonard and I were going through. But overall, some of you that heard or watched the movie The Band of Brothers about the 101st Airborne Division and the battles that they went through, at the very end, the Captain Winters made the comment, he said, his grandson asked him, "Grandpa, were you a hero in the war?" And he said, "No, but I served with a bunch of heroes." And to me, that's John Borbridge, Roger Lang, Clarence Jackson, Cyril George, Gil Gunderson. I tell you, serving with those people, those leaders, You have no idea the excitement that this young person had, and I absolutely enjoyed every minute that I was associated with him. Marlene Johnson taught me etiquette in a restaurant. Believe it or not. John Borbridge taught me Robert's Rules of Order. Dick Keto taught me how to take minutes when I was executive committee secretary. Roger Lang taught me a lot of jokes, I tell you, he was. But that is Roger. Roger taught us political savvy, how to get around things. But again, overall, there were so many times when we were together, we didn't realize how bonded we were, and we were bonded. We were so close, almost like a bunch of brothers and one sister. But it was always exciting, realizing the history that we were a part of. I brought with me some of my own pictures that I took when we were in Washington, D.C. And there's one particular picture that I'm very fond of. It was the very moment that Sealaska Corporation was created, when the motion was made and we voted on it to name it Sealaska. I have that picture in my collection. And then very shortly after that, when the incorporators went and sat down and signed the incorporation paper. But things like that were just so much a part of everyday life for us, but turns out to be history. And again, it taught leadership, at least to me, because I was a young person getting into the Indian politics. At the time, I was the president of the Craig ANB, president of the Craig Tlingit Haida. And I tell you, I thought I was a great public speaker till I came and met these people. I learned so much from them. And again, we hope that a lot of what we did will have some impact on not only our children, but our grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And now I am a grandfather. I'm one of those very proud grandparents. I have 14 grandsons. At one time, there was only one Isaacs left. That was me. And now there's 14 of them. And I got 5 granddaughters. And they're all involved in not only sports, academically, they're involved in their church, and none of them are involved in alcohol and drugs. But these are the kind of things that we as board members were always aware of. No matter what we did, we supported different programs that meant that we were going to have a good group of young people coming behind us. I look now at the people that are serving on the Sealaska board, the Tlingit Haida Executive Committee, our ANB grand presidents, grand officers, and I've served in almost all those positions at one time or another. And again, it just brings so much home to me as a young leader. I'm no longer the young leader anymore because I see my 3 sons that are involved politically and my daughter business-wise. But it's a good feeling, a very good feeling though, knowing that I served with these people and learned from them. There are so many stories and incidents, events that we can look back on and laugh. We had so much. I don't believe there's a board of directors of the Sealaska Corporation now that ever had as much fun as we did. We were the original group, and we just had fun together. We took care of each other. We were always taking care of each other, no matter what the situation was. We took care of each other. And now we look back on how many of those that are gone from us. And I honestly, I do get choked up when I think about those guys. Roger Lang, Jeff David, Dick Keto. It's difficult knowing that they're gone from us now. George C. was our corporate secretary. George was just an absolute angel along with us. But again, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure, an honor, and a thrill to have served on the Sealaska board, and especially the original board of directors of Sealaska Corporation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Aaron, as a small token of our appreciation, we wanted to give you this plaque in remembrance of your great contribution and leadership to Sealaska. Thank you very much. And I also want to recognize Betty, because I know that many of the wives and the spouses of our directors had to go through a lot of sacrifices when their husbands and their spouses were working. So thank you very much, Betty, for always being there and supporting Aaron also. Thank you. Certificate of Appreciation. This certificate is presented to Aaron T. Isaacs in recognition and appreciation for your strong leadership in getting the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act passed into law. Signed, Edward Thomas and Albert Kukash.
Thank you.
The comment about the wife supporting, the day after I was elected to the Clinton Heights Exec Committee, I was walking down to the airplane in Petersburg to catch the plane, and I happened to be walking down with Emma Borbridge, and we were talking, and I made the comment that I am prepared to sacrifice, I used the wrong word then, to sacrifice time to Clinton Heights Essential Council. She said, no, Aaron, you're not going to sacrifice time. She said, you're going to be contributing time to Sealaska. I never forgot that. But that woman was just an absolute angel. And again, I do want to mention last November 5th, what's that, 10 days, 12 days ago, Betty and I celebrated 45-year anniversary.
I'm going to ask Ed Thomas to come introduce the next individual. Edward?
Thank you, Albert. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce the next speaker. As a former president of Clinton Heights, John Borbridge is known in many circles. If you were a Sheldon Jackson person, you would often hear him referred to as Coach Borbridge. I can remember when I was at ANB conventions and John Borbridge would give a report on Sealaska. It really was artistic the way he was able to bring about the issues of our people in a speech without a PowerPoint. But anyway, I really do appreciate the leadership of John Borbridge over the years and all that he did